Okay, we are diving right in. I'm here with Brian Watson. Brian, thank you for joining me. Brian is currently the co-founder of AltSpace and my most watched ever YouTube guest.
I think we hit a nerve on our last
Oh my
discussion.
gosh, I don't know. Or it's the fact that I noticed it's on your website. So I thought, well, maybe that's where it all comes from. Anyway, we were just starting to talk before we recorded about the fact that you have a new member of the family. And
Yeah.
I was thinking, I don't know, I was thinking about our podcast yesterday. My daughter's 11 and she is in that age where she thinks it's normal to be a YouTuber.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like she thinks
Uh,
she's going to make money on YouTube at some point. As soon as I let her post to YouTube, I was like, hey, maybe it should be your summer project to like start creating some content. She's like, you said I can't, you won't let me. I was like, okay, we'll think about it. I was like, what are you going to post about? Because I think and then I was thinking about you and our viral episode. And then I was like, I wonder if Brian has any kids that think they're going to be YouTubers. Not yet, but
Not yet, but I'm sure we'll be having that discussion here in the years to come.
wait, girl or boy?
Little girl, Eva.
Eva.
Yeah.
Nice.
10 months old right now.
10 months. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
out of like being shell shocked, but yeah, it's a lot of work to have a kid.
It's just a completely different thing that like, it's so funny because I always say this, but everyone's like, how is it? And it's like, I could never explain to myself before having a kid what's going to be like to have a kid.
No.
And now you just don't really know what you did with all your free time before you had a kid. But it's awesome, and she's great, and yeah, it's definitely a new adventure, and she's amazing.
It's fascinating always to me that people have children all the time, but no one can explain or prepare or teach someone else like how to be ready for that. It's one of those
Yeah,
fascinating things like in life.
you're
like,
either like in the
yeah,
club or you are not,
or
in
you're
the
not.
club.
You just can't like imagine. Totally. It's so
Yep.
interesting. Yeah. And all the different stages. I am in the stage now where I just try to keep my mouth shut as often as possible because my 11-year-old is, they talk about teenagers, but actually adolescent starts earlier. So
Oh,
um
that's a different categorization.
yeah. So we won't talk about parenting, but I have to mention this, like so at this age, so I'm reading this book about teenage emotions and it's modern and very interesting. So it talks about how kids want to create their own brand.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, I can relate to this, like as a business
Totally.
owner and
Yeah.
I was like, I totally get this. And so they do not specifically want the brand to have anything to do with their parents.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, their
Parents are
parents
like
are like
the
the anti-brand.
anti-brand.
Exactly. So this is very interesting. So even if I think I'm an interesting human who does interesting things, she wants like I don't know
Nothing to
anything.
do with
Her
it.
brand is totally different. So this was like mind-blowing to me. I was like, okay, I get it. And she's annoyed with a lot of things that I say. I mean, she's still like, we still have a great relationship, but I have to shut my mouth a lot and test my Zen.
Patience and listening skills.
Which is totally different from having a 10-month-old or a 3-year-old or like all the parenting skills. Like you should have another kid because I didn't and I never reused any of the skills and now I just have to keep learning new ones.
Well, everyone just says like it's like constant, you're constantly like in a new phase, you're constantly learning, but just they just like push on all the things that you need to work on all the time. It just brings it to the surface.
Any
And
weaknesses I have as a human, yes, are amplified by this kid.
yep.
So anyway, okay. So you're in Grand Junction. We are just chatting
Yep.
about that with the fam.
Yep.
But you have 7 locations, no
Correct.
employees, and hundreds of happy customers. I love that description. It's so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for anybody, I'll put the link to our viral YouTube video in the show notes for anybody who wants to go back to that. But that was a while ago.
It's probably like maybe 2.5, 3 years ago now.
No. It's not long
Is that
ago.
wrong?
No, I'll have to look it up. But I will totally fact check our assumptions,
Okay,
but
that sounds good.
yeah. Okay. But for those that haven't seen the video, or listened to the podcast, we'll give a little context, a little background, and then we'll do some updates.
Totally. So,
And no pressure
really,
for this one to also go viral, Brian. You have to be really interesting and compelling. I was like, I better make sure I'm wearing a different outfit than last time.
yeah, that'd be
Because
hilarious. We're just dressed exactly the same.
yeah, you were at least in a different location last time. So
Yeah,
yeah.
we're a
No,
little different, at least, obviously.
only
So,
a year, March of 2022.
oh, well, then that's not bad at all. This is a
Not
perfect
totally
kind of
not bad at all. Yeah.
update.
Yeah. Okay.
So, synopsis of the last one was we were coming out of COVID.
Yeah.
And really, I live on the western slope of Colorado, and we've done a lot of work, especially with like rural spaces. But I think this conversation translates to a lot of people. I know that you do consulting with all sorts of spaces, and I was just listening to a recent podcast that you were doing, and you and the other guy were talking about really kind of like that, like 10,000 square foot threshold of like feasibility in a lot of these spaces. And I think that was always, obviously my background, I was a co-founder of Proximity, and we got to work with all sorts of co-founders and space operators around the country, as you get to as well. And I think that the big question that always comes up is just viability of business. And for us, living in rural communities, I was at Telluride at the same time. Now we're in Grand Junction, but it's basically all rural. And the thing that always, not bothered, but just like that thing that just you can't get rid of, was the belief that co-working spaces are an incredible asset for communities. They're so important. They have so much impact. And yet, in a lot of these communities that can't sustain 150,000 square foot WeWork, or like some of these bigger spaces, you really have no other choice than to go smaller, or really the options are these smaller footprints. But how do you make them viable, right? And the reason that it was so, this question that would just always nag at me, is because we really started in co-working from an economic development and community impact standpoint. And so the equation has always been, historically, they're like grant funded or whatever. And so, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be sustainable for a long time. And so you have this cyclical nature of like impact, community impact, and then the grants go away, or the volunteers go away, and then you lose all that momentum. And so coming out of COVID, my wife and I were working out of a co-working space in Telluride. I was working full time. She was working full time, and the space that we were working out of closed. And so it displaced everyone. We found a location that was kind of a perfect kind of alternative solution. We opened the co-working space in that location, but we knew that because both of us were full time and only had so much capacity, it really needed to be automated. And so we built it kind of automated from day one, and just said, whether we're here or not, we want the space to be an asset to this community. We want people to engage here. We want people to be able to use this resource, but we need to do it as automated as possible. And then we had the opportunity to purchase several other co-working spaces kind of throughout the region. And so we tested that model, and then, expanded the way that we were doing it, and kind of fully committed to the automation. And I think the other thing that we found was, there's several things that we found that we can kind of talk about more today. But the other thing is the business model, not just the square footage, but if you have a space manager at every single location, that really impacts the business model and the viability of that business. And so you really do need kind of economies of scale, especially with smaller footprints, in order to make it all work and sustainable. And the sustainability part was so important if you want to have long-term kind of vision or long-term impact that will be sustainable for a long time.
Yeah. So you connected me with the San Luis Valley group, which we'll have to talk about after recording. it's like blowing my mind. I work with a lot of folks that come through my startup school do not fall into the 10,000 foot category. And in a lot of markets today, it's super interesting. It's really hard to like qualify for that much space. Landlords are being super picky. You have to have this giant, it's hard. And so, right, for me, when I get those folks, I'm like, okay, if we're not going with the traditional model, right, how do we make this work? So I love these conversations. And the San Luis Valley group, I mean, wow, made up of these incredible folks who are in super small markets, but want to make an impact, want to serve a community, maybe have grants. How do they make it work? It's not going to look like a traditional co-working space. So I think this happens all the time and isn't as well covered sort of by the media. And yeah, it's challenging as a, content creator. I think you're talking about the Jerry Alexander discussion where we're like, yeah, 10,000 feet is like a no-brainer, right? So if you're just talking like, how do you do the simplest model and make it profitable? Well, that's it. But then lots of people aren't going to go that route.
Totally.
And everybody has a different why, right? Like the San Luis Valley group is fascinating. Landlords that want to contribute, but have to figure out, the Boys and Girls Club for the Valley is there and just bought a building and they want to put a bunch of nonprofits together. And it's like, not everybody's after, producing a 25% margin on their space.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love the conversations where it's like, okay, what else works? How do we make this possible?
Totally. And I think, that was always one of the very first questions that you should be asking when you're consulting with companies is like, what does success look like? How are we quantifying
what's your why?
success?
What do you need to accomplish? Totally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, I think a lot of different entities have, especially with co-working, have different ways that they are measuring success. But again, long-term viability and sustainability must be a part of the equation, and so we have to figure that out. And so I think, that was really kind of the driver of how we began that discussion. And I think that we've really shown that it's working well. I think the other thing that has changed a lot is consumer behavior post-COVID has just changed a lot. And so I think, there's a lot of people that are especially remote workers that are traveling. We have a lot of men and women who are like doing the van life thing, traveling all over and still need to get stuff done. They've still got board meetings that they've got to jump in.
Right.
Whatever. And so
Wi-Fi access, right? That they can't get. Yeah.
And so, just knowing like guaranteed 24/7 access, they can get in there, they can get their work done and they can kind of be on their way. Like, I think that is like another big shift that we've seen post-COVID and having a system that is, touchless, self-service, and that they can rely upon and they know that they can get in and get to work and everything has been, good. That's a different type of customer than the person that's like living there or moved there and is looking to build a whole community out of your co-working space. And so I think that's just a whole other segment of customers that you didn't really have as much before.
Wait, so I am curious. I get this resistance from folks, the 24/7 access. How do you just were like, you know what, we need to get over that, like whatever sort of concerns or stories around that not being cool for members? Like I get a lot of folks who are like, no way am I letting non-members, does somebody have to be a member to come in 24/7 or can they get access if they're passing through? How do you think about that?
So, the way that we really think, we have cameras in all of our spaces.
I know, that's what I was saying. Door access and cameras. Have at it.
So all of our spaces are closed to the public. They're locked, and so you don't have like random people just walking in because they are locked. And so it's a payment access basically. And so you have cameras and, the majority of people that are working there are still coming in during like regular hours or whatever. And, every co-working space has its kind of family group of members that are there. So, you've got a lot of eyes in the space. And so that's how we really deal with it. We've never had any issues. And I think it is something that is easy for people to say, like, that's going to be too scary, or there's like too much risk there. But I think really having the doors locked all the time and having a payment gateway there provides a lot of accountability. There's cameras there. I was laughing. I was thinking, I was listening to a podcast with the Airbnb guys, and they were saying, like, when they first started, everyone was like, strangers in your house, this is the worst idea
in my
ever.
bed. No freaking way.
Yeah. So I think it is one of those things that a lot of people, would be deterred from that kind of setup at first. But I think it's something that we had kind of the risk tolerance to say, like, there's only so much you could do, to kind of protect yourself. We've done all those things, and it's never been a big deal.
And it's like a risk benefit thing for you. You're like, look, we're trying to make a model that works. We're trying to support this segment of humans, and they need access, and they're not maybe going to be full-time members. We're not going to know their birth date and their dog's name, but I had a break-in. I hate talking about this, but I do talk about it at each of my locations in Chicago and Palo Alto. I think once you go through that, you're like, if somebody's going to try to do something bad, they're going to do it. It's not going to be the people who paid for a day pass.
Totally.
So surviving that is pretty brutal. So yeah, I'm in the camp of, when it makes sense. I mean, there are people who don't want to do it and don't want any outside folks, but your model is different. And to your point, who you're serving and the sustainability factor. Yeah,
totally. So I guess what other questions or
I mean, so anything you've changed since we last talked? You were doing, around the automation front, like anything that is working super well, not working, so now that you've done this for a while, like, what advice would you give to people thinking about the automation factor? The other thing I would say that I think is interesting potentially since we last talked is, I think, there's just a lot of lot of focus on like the public versions, the WeWorks, and of course who knows what's going to turn out. And this like model that works, and there are 100% people pursuing that in a sort of scalable, like building a business sort of way. The work bars that I was just at Juicy maybe a month ago now. And I thought what was interesting is just a lot of discussion around how else can the model work? To your point, like, not everybody's going to do a 10,000 square foot space that's really focused on, dense office use. I mean, there's a lot of people really experimenting with like the clubhouse approach, the work club approach, what if we do a small space, but events makes a bunch of the money, and food and beverage, and just people like really think, to your point, like, what do people want to buy? What do they need?
Totally. Well, and I think that, co-working is still in its infancy, right? And I think that, it's funny because we've been in it for a decade now, and yet there's still so much evolution that's taking place. And I think really kind of the macro environment that we're going through is having everyone's kind of looking and saying, like, again, how do we make this model work? Things are getting more expensive, margins are getting lower, money is getting more expensive and less accessible. And so, what do we do? And I think that is another reason why I think, leaning into technology solutions, automation solutions really is a good way, probably the best way to increase margin and to increase efficiency, right? And so I think, whether you're like us and you're running, small spaces, or I know a lot of brands are running multiple locations in a region or something like that. And, if you can augment your team with technology and systemization that allows for your customers to engage and interact with everyone, you can get a lot of the stuff that you were doing done with technology now that you just couldn't have gotten done 10 years ago. And I think people's ability to adopt those things are becoming more and more accessible too. And so I think, in this window of time where everyone's kind of trying to figure out how do we make all these things work? What are the things that we should be implementing? I think really, being able to kind of double down and say, what we found is that because we committed to being like building a technology stack that allowed us to automate, there's a couple of things that happen. It made a model that would not have been profitable in the old version profitable.
Yep.
It's given us a lot of time back because, so much of a co-working owner or space manager's job is like logistics. Like what we've really helped them do is our system automates member onboarding and management. And so, how many times are you answering phone calls, or you're just trying to get people in the system or explain how all that stuff works? It's like the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And then if you have space managers that you're cycling through, not everyone's doing things the same way. And so that standardization is difficult to manage because different people do that process differently. When you're leveraging a system, we're iterating on it all the time. So it's getting better and better and better. And then it's better for everyone forever, basically. Right. And so I think
it's like a software update, sort of. You're just
like a software update.
Load this into how we do things. And
totally. Oh, we're getting the same question, 5 times in a week. Let's answer that question in our initial onboarding outreach, to people. And then it's updated for everyone in perpetuity. Right. And so I think being able to kind of double down on that system allows us to kind of make rapid iteration and eliminate those problems moving forward. And so I think, that there's trade-offs to all that stuff. The other thing is, we've swung the pendulum kind of as far as we can on that side, but I think, I've talked to several space operators or, co-working space owners that have multiple locations, and they're trying to figure out the spaces and the events and all of these like kind of different components that they're like bringing together. And so I think what is nice is by automating onboarding and management, that stuff you just don't have to worry about anymore. And then if you've got more of like a regional team that are like A+ players at events or whatever, if you want to do that, then that team can run that region, and really just focus on that and not get bogged down by the other stuff that becomes a distraction.
Focus on
events or programming or human relationship, right? And so I think part of the challenge of space management is just the constant changing of direction day to day. Like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do XYZ. Oh wait, no, I'm not, because someone's coming up and talking to me. And so shifting all the time is not the most efficient way to work, I think, as we know that. So like our joke is always like, if you want to get stuff done, go to the co-working space, unless you're the space manager, and then you will not get anything done ever.
Right.
And so, so we just said, we kind of tried to look at it and say, what are the different components that need to get done at our spaces in order for them to be operating, And so the space member onboarding and management was a segment of the job, right? And so we could say, we're going to eliminate the need for anyone to really focus on this because we're going to build a system that's going to do it. And we can kind of tweak that and make it better and better and better, where we don't have to allocate as much time, or we're not replicating the work over and over. It's just done for us on autopilot. And again, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, your point about, a lot of the role is logistics, even if we don't want it to be. I've been talking to a lot of asset owners who are trying to figure out, they have space. Does it make sense to do flex? And I was just talking to one this morning. They're pretty significant asset owner around the country, and their asset manager was on. She's like, okay, so she's like terrified about like what happens if I have a manager and they quit or they're out. And I was like, exactly, because the challenge is a lot of this role, we were talking about like the profile of who you hire. And I said, look, the challenge is like a lot of this role is like all the little things that you can't imagine are happening, like onboarding and offboarding, all the things you just mentioned. And I said, you can automate / outsource some of that, which I think, to your point, even for people with teams on site, like, does it make sense to sort of separate the two? And I run this community manager program, and it's like, right, you have to hire a unicorn who likes people and likes systems
and detailed and everything, right?
Yes.
And it's like,
yeah,
oh, and they have to like cleaning toilets, and they have to like
making
all these
coffee.
other things, right? And so it's like segment the work.
Yeah, does it make sense
right?
to decouple? And I think that's another thing that, right, as the industry is evolving, you're like, well, how else could this be done? Maybe it makes sense to really automate or take. So I think that's a really interesting conversation. I'm curious. So you could decouple those probably for spaces of a lot of sizes, but the model that you're running, what do you think is the max square footage that can support being pretty
Something
fully automated?
Like how big? I
Yeah.
think, I think that we could go well past 10, or like we're in a building that's 20,000 square feet here. So we're, it's 20,000, 10 and 10
Mm-hmm.
offices in like 3/4 of the building.
Okay.
And then kind of that flexible co-working in the last quarter. So right now, this is a building that my buddy owns. And so we're really providing all the like ongoing management in the flexible space. But then all of his offices, we can update the codes and stuff like that for them. And so I think like this is just another thing that by shifting fully, we've had to work through of like, what about like space tours, and what about,
Right.
all of that stuff. And I think what we found is that by trial and error. So I'll give you just a quick story so that we can kind of talk about, when we're back and forth. So we have spaces over like a 2.5 hour, drive or whatever. And so when we first started, I was doing tours. You could book a tour online, and then I would drive and go meet people and do the tours. Well, that wasn't very sustainable. Or, there was a time where it was like, oh, I'm supposed to be in spot A and I'm in spot B today, right? Like life happens. And so guess what? We just started doing phone tours and calling in, and then I can log in on the cameras and walk them through and get them in the space, which is a great explainer of like how our system works. It's all automated.
Okay, pull your phone out. We're gonna do this.
Yeah, totally. And so
almost like an onboarding, right? If they convert, okay, they've done it one time.
And it's even nicer in a lot of ways, because it's so to the point. It's like, hey, I'm interested in an office. I'm doing a one today with someone. Cool. You get in, I can log in, see you, they're walking through the space, I'm watching them, we can kind of talk about where everything's at the same time. I'm like, who are you, what do you do, why did you move over here?
This person's got their headphones on, like just chit-chatting with you.
Yeah. Which again, I like normally I'd be like, this is probably not the ideal way to do it, but it actually, in doing a lot of them, converts probably the same amount as in person. And
I don't doubt that, because I think, and again, this is something I talk to operators a lot about, is it's not a complicated model, but lots of operators don't execute it that well.
Yeah.
They don't even give a great in-person tour.
Yeah. Well, and again, you're
if
asking like
down and all the things to ask, which is really just engaging the person like a human.
Totally.
And you can totally do it virtually.
Yeah.
And probably be better than, a huge percentage of, I'm not picking on anybody who's listening out there, but I think a lot of tour processes and people giving them could have better training.
Well, totally. And I think it's, again, this is the world that we kind of live in today too, which is a hybrid world,
Yeah.
right? Like digital virtual communication and in person, right? And so I think, when we're done, if you would walk through the space, I would have known this is Jamie. She lives in California. She's moving to Colorado. She has a podcast. Cool. We can talk about that. And I would say, I'm going to connect you with these three people,
Right.
in this space so you can engage with them, walk you through the space, talk about the amenities. There's the office you want, or the desk you want, or the flex seating you want. Great. Looks awesome. Hang up. I text you a direct link to the membership that you told me you wanted to buy, and call me if you need anything, or text me if you need anything. And, and then 2 seconds later, I see him sign up online. Like,
What if they don't? Do you have a like a sales process?
Yeah,
Okay.
like a follow-up.
Yeah.
So
Again, how many operators don't have that in place? I feel like automating like really focuses you to get your crap together and have your whole sales funnel just down.
it forces you to do
Yeah.
that. And then again, it's set and done for everyone forever, and I think this, it also forces you to kind of test things that when you can rely on humans, which I think is good, it allows you to not have to do that, because you can just figure it out, or
Yeah.
someone will just figure things out, but the system is not built. And so I think, this process allows you to build that system. The other thing that I would say is, again, kind of the world that we live in. I think a lot of people are like, well, what about the relationship that you're building with people?
Yeah.
You can build relationships with people on the phone, or through Zoom, or through whatever. And then when we see each other in person, it's like, what's up?
Yeah.
And so, again, I think there are trade-offs to everything, but I think that these are some of the benefits and some of the ways that the world has changed, in our favor. And, we were talking about tours and conversion ratios on tours being about the same. And even if they're off 5% or 10%, which I would say they're probably not, it's probably about the same. How much money are you saving in each one of those locations by adjusting to this? And does that make financial sense to make that decision? 100%, absolutely.